You know what's wild? When you've got a generational talent, the kind that comes around once in a lifetime, and instead of building the perfect ecosystem around her, you keep putting obstacles in her path. That's not coaching. That's sabotage dressed up as strategy. And right now, we need to talk about the elephant in the room that nobody else has the guts to address. Stephanie White and Caitlin Clark. This relationship, this coaching dynamic, this entire situation that keeps unfolding like a bad dream that Fever fans can't wake up from. Look, I'm not here to spread hate. I'm not here to tear anybody down for clicks. But I am here to tell you the truth that's been sitting heavy on every real basketball fan's chest since the moment White took that podium as Indiana's head coach. Something isn't right. And if you've been paying attention, really paying attention, you already know what I'm talking about. Welcome to the channel where we keep it real, no matter who it makes uncomfortable. Make sure you smash that like button, drop a comment with your honest thoughts, subscribe if you haven't already, and hit that notification bell, because this conversation is about to get very real very fast. Now let's dive in. The Indiana Fever just shared some interesting information about Stephanie White during this WNBA offseason. According to reports from Athlon Sports and multiple sources, Stephanie White made an appearance at Gainbridge Fieldhouse on Wednesday night. But here's the thing, she wasn't there for Fever business. She was there courtside, watching the Indiana Pacers take on the Toronto Raptors. On the surface, that's perfectly fine. Coaches are human. They deserve downtime. They deserve to enjoy sports as fans. But let's zoom out for a second and look at the bigger picture. The picture that should have every Fever fan's alarm bells ringing at maximum volume. Stephanie White just completed her first season coaching Caitlin Clark and the Indiana Fever. And I'm going to say something that might be controversial, but needs to be said. A lot of us wish it was her last season too. Now, before you come at me, hear me out. This isn't about Stephanie White as a person. By all accounts, she's a decent human being. She's got credentials, former WNBA Coach of the Year, Connecticut Suns experience, Indiana basketball legacy. On paper, it looked like a homecoming story that would write itself into fairy tale territory. But basketball isn't played on paper. Championships aren't won with nostalgia. And generational talents like Caitlin Clark don't reach their full potential when they're being held back by coaching philosophies that don't match their revolutionary skill set. Let me take you back to something that's been gnawing at me since it happened. During the off-season, Caitlin Clark went to train for the Olympics. She's putting in that work, trying to elevate her game to even higher levels. And guess who shows up? Stephanie White. It's like Caitlin can't get any separation, can't get any space to breathe, to develop under different voices, to experience different coaching perspectives. Everywhere Caitlin goes, there's Stephanie White, hovering like a shadow she can't shake. Now, the first season had its challenges, no question. The Fever dealt with a tumultuous campaign marred by injuries. Caitlin Clark, Kelsey Mitchell, and multiple other players suffered season-ending injuries before the playoffs even got into full swing. White managed to lead a short-handed Fever squad to the semifinals, where they lost to the eventual champions, the Las Vegas Aces, in a thrilling 5-game series. On the surface, that sounds respectable, right? Making the semifinals despite injuries. That's coaching, isn't it? But here's where we need to dig deeper. Here's where the uncomfortable questions start bubbling up. How much of that success was because of Stephanie White's coaching brilliance? And how much was it simply the unstoppable force of nature that is Caitlin Clark dragging that team to victories through pure individual excellence? When you've got a player who can single-handedly shift the entire momentum of a game, a player who sees passes that don't exist in anyone else's reality, a player who's bringing millions of new eyeballs to a league that's been starving for mainstream attention, you gotta ask yourself, is this coach maximizing that talent or just riding the wave? And that's the question that should haunt every single person in the Indiana Fever front office as they head into these critical CBA negotiations and off-season decisions. Because here's what's really at stake, and why this matters way more than just one coaching position. The WNBA is at a crossroads. The league has been handed a golden ticket in the form of Caitlin Clark, a superstar with crossover appeal, marketability, skill, and the kind of cultural impact that transcends the sport itself. But instead of protecting that investment, instead of building the absolute perfect situation around her, instead of making sure every single decision is optimized for her success and development, what are we doing? We're letting politics, egos, old-school thinking, and comfortable relationships dictate the direction of a franchise that should be on the cutting edge of innovation. And that brings us to the real issue that's about to explode if things don't change fast. The CBA negotiations, the player demands, the league's response, and Stephanie White's role in all of it. Because when these CBA talks are finally settled, when the dust clears and the new agreements are signed, if Stephanie White is still standing between Caitlin Clark and her full potential, is she still the barrier preventing this generational talent from reaching heights we've never seen in women's basketball, then we got a serious problem that goes way beyond wins and losses. We're talking about wasting a once-in-a-generation opportunity. And that's something the WNBA, the Fever, and the fans cannot afford. But there's more to this story. So much more. And what I'm about to reveal next is going to change how you see this entire situation. Let's talk about what's really happened behind the scenes. Because while Stephanie White is sitting courtside at Pacers games, enjoying her off-season, there's a full-blown circus happening with the WNBA and the Players Association that's about to determine the entire future of this league. And Caitlin Clark is stuck right in the middle of it. Here's what most people don't understand. The WNBA and the WNBPA are currently locked in CBA negotiations that have turned into an absolute disaster. And I'm not exaggerating when I say they mishandled the Caitlin Clark era at literally every single turn. Every single turn. Think about it. The league finally gets the superstar they've been desperately needing for decades. The one player who can fill arenas, drive television ratings, get casual sports fans actually tuning into women's basketball. The player who makes highlight reels that go viral, who generates authentic buzz that money can't buy. And what does the league do with this gift from the basketball? Gods? They fumble it. Repeatedly. Spectacularly. Almost impressively in how badly they've botched this golden opportunity. You had media personalities like Monica McNutt pushing false narratives all season long. It's not just Caitlin. It's all the women. It's the entire league elevating together. That became the party line. The narrative they wanted everyone to swallow without question. And look, I get it. I understand the desire to celebrate all the talented women in the WNBA. There are incredible players in that league who deserve recognition and respect. Nobody's arguing against that. But here's the harsh truth that some people refuse to accept. Caitlin Clark is the reason for this current boom. Not sort of, not partially, not as part of a collective effort. She is the reason. And we know this is true because of what happened with the unrivaled league. Remember that? The new 3-on-3 league that launched with big expectations and major promotion? They got all these WNBA stars to participate. All these talented women that the media kept telling us were equally responsible for the WNBA's growth. And you know what happened? Crickets. Absolute crickets. Nobody's watching. The ratings are abysmal. The social media engagement is non-existent. All those players who are supposed to be carrying the momentum of women's basketball forward are playing in front of empty seats and in different audiences. Why? Because Caitlin Clark isn't there. That's a reality check that the WNBA and the WNBPA desperately needed, but apparently didn't learn from. Now, let's bring this back to the CBA situation, because this is where everything connects and where Stephanie White becomes a critical factor. Doug Gottlieb, love him or hate him, made some incredibly valid points about how entitled the WNBPA has been acting during these negotiations. And before you jump down my throat, just listen to the facts. The WNBA had this massive opportunity. They've got Caitlin Clark as their new centerpiece. They've got a chance, with all the dysfunction happening in other major sports, to actually capitalize on the momentum and grow the league to unprecedented levels. And what happened during All-Star Weekend in Indianapolis? Indianapolis, where Caitlin Clark owns that town, where the Fever have been selling out the Pacers Arena for regular season games, where there's a tremendous basketball fan base that's passionate, engaged, and ready to support women's basketball at the highest level. The players came out wearing t-shirts that said, "Pay us what you owe us." Okay, fine. Players want better compensation. That's reasonable. That's their right to advocate for themselves. But here's where it all fell apart. Here's where the entitlement that Gottlieb mentioned became impossible to ignore. Caitlin Clark didn't play in the All-Star game, the one player that the majority of fans showed up to see absent. Then the players proceeded to put on one of the most embarrassing, unwatchable performances in All-Star game history. People were leaving at halftime. Fans who paid good money for tickets were walking out because the product on the court was so bad. The effort was non-existent. The entertainment value was zero. And these are the same players who just publicly demanded, "Pay us what you owe us," before delivering a product that nobody wanted to watch. Do you see the problem here? Do you see the disconnect? You can't demand NBA-level money while delivering a product that drives fans away. You can't claim you deserve more while actively disrespecting the audience that's trying to support you. And here's the kicker. There were subtle jabs thrown at Caitlin Clark and her team for not participating in discussions about those t-shirts beforehand. They tried to make her look like she wasn't a team player because she didn't want to be part of their public negotiating tactics. Think about that. The one player who's actually generating the revenue, who's actually putting butts in seats, who's actually making the league watchable for mainstream audiences. They try to shame her for not falling in line with their entitled demands. This is insane. This is backwards. This is exactly the kind of dysfunction that will kill the WNBA's golden opportunity. And this is where Stephanie White comes into play in a way that should terrify every Fever fan. Because when the CBA gets finalized, when the power dynamics in the league get reshuffled, when the player empowerment movement either succeeds or fails, who's going to be steering Caitlin Clark's career through those turbulent waters? Stephanie White, a coach who's already shown she's willing to play political games. A coach who seems more interested in maintaining relationships with the old guard than revolutionizing her approach for a revolutionary player. Adam Silver, the NBA commissioner, has already made it clear how the league is approaching these negotiations. He's basically said, "Look, we're going to give you more money. We're doing everything we can to raise salaries. But this isn't about percentages. This isn't about matching NBA revenue splits. This is about what's financially sustainable." That's the reality. That's the business truth that some players don't want to hear. The WNBA has now stopped responding to the WNBPA's demands. They've sent 3 comprehensive offers, and they're essentially saying, take it or leave it. These are your options. We're not negotiating against ourselves anymore. And in the middle of all this chaos, all this dysfunction, all this league-wide identity crisis, we got Caitlin Clark trying to build a championship career, trying to maximize her prime years, trying to cement her legacy, and the person who has the most direct influence over her daily development, her strategic deployment, her growth as a player, Stephanie White. Still, always, unavoidably, that's the issue. That's why this matters. That's why when I see reports about Stephanie White casually attending Pacers games while the league burned around her, I can't help but wonder, is she the right leader for this moment? Is she the visionary coach that Caitlin Clark needs? Or is she just another obstacle in a path that's already crowded with too many barriers? The answer to that question might determine the entire future of the WNBA. And what I'm about to show you next proves exactly why this is more urgent than anyone's willing to admit. Here's what nobody's talking about, but everyone's thinking. Coaching philosophy matters. And when your philosophy doesn't match your superstar skill set, you're not just leaving points on the table. You're suffocating greatness before it can fully breathe. Let me show you exactly what I mean. During Caitlin Clark's rookie season with the Fever, there were moments, critical moments, where Stephanie White's coaching decisions left everyone scratching their heads. And I'm not talking about minor tactical adjustments or debatable timeout calls. I'm talking about fundamental approaches to how you utilize a player who sees the game differently than anyone else on the planet. Caitlin Clark doesn't play basketball the way it's been traditionally played. She doesn't fit into the neat little boxes that old-school coaches love to draw on their whiteboards. Her range extends to the logo. Her passing vision operates in dimensions that most players can't even perceive. Her ability to create offense out of absolute chaos is supernatural. You don't coach a player like that the same way you coach everyone else. You can't. It's like having a Ferrari and driving it like a minivan, because that's what you're comfortable with. And that's exactly what we saw too many times during that first season. There were games where Caitlin would get hot from deep, absolutely scorching. And instead of riding that nuclear heat, the offense would inexplicably shift away from her. Like the coaching staff was more concerned with getting everyone involved than winning the damn game. There were possessions where Caitlin would be in rhythm, in her zone, in that place where elite scorers become unstoppable, and she wouldn't touch the ball for 3 straight trips down the floor. Why? Because the system said so. Because the predetermined rotation said so. Because that's how Stephanie White wanted to play. But here's the thing about generational talents. They don't succeed because they follow the system. They succeed when you build the system around them. Greg Popovich rebuilt the Spurs' entire offensive philosophy around Tim Duncan's skill set. Phil Jackson created the triangle offense to maximize Michael Jordan and later Kobe Bryant. Steve Kerr transformed the Warriors into a motion offense designed specifically to unleash Steph Curry's gravitational shooting threat. The greatest coaches in basketball history understood one fundamental truth. When you have a transcendent talent, you don't force them to adapt to your vision. You adapt your vision to their gifts. So the question becomes, has Stephanie White shown any indication that she's willing or able to do that for Caitlin Clark? And based on what we witnessed in year one, the answer is deeply concerning. Let's talk about defensive schemes for a minute, because this is where coaching really shows its impact and where White's approach revealed some troubling patterns. Caitlin Clark, despite being a rookie, despite being the primary focus of every opposing defense, despite getting targeted and physically beaten up game after game, she kept showing up, kept producing, kept willing that fever team to victories. But what was Stephanie White doing to protect her franchise player? What adjustments were being made to shield Caitlin from the relentless physical assault she faced every single night? Not enough. Not nearly enough. There were games where Caitlin would get mauled on one end of the floor, no calls from the refs, and then immediately have to carry the offensive load on the other end. The toll it takes on a player, especially a rookie, is immense. And yes, injuries happened. The Fever got decimated by injuries throughout that season. But here's what should make you pause. How many of those injuries were preventable with better roster management? With smarter rotation patterns? With a coaching staff that prioritizes long-term health over short-term wins in meaningless regular season games? When Caitlin was clearly gassed, clearly running on fumes, clearly needing a breather, was she getting pulled? Or was she out there playing 38 minutes a night? Because the coaching staff had no other answer, no other plan, no other system that could function without her on the floor? That's not player development. That's player exploitation. And look, I get it. When you have a competitor like Caitlin Clark, someone who never wants to come out of the game, someone whose will to win overrides every physical limitation, it's hard to pull her. She'll fight you on it. But that's when coaching matters most. That's when you have to be the adult in the room who protects your asset from herself. That's when you prove you're thinking about championships, not just tonight's box score. Did we see that level of strategic thinking from Stephanie White? Did we see evidence of a coach playing chess while everyone else plays checkers? Or did we see a coach who seemed overwhelmed by the magnitude of the moment, by the pressure of coaching the WNBA's most scrutinized team, by the responsibility of nurturing the most important player the league has seen in decades? Now let's talk about the playoff series against the Las Vegas Aces, because this is where the coaching limitations became impossible to ignore. The Aces are a dynasty. They're experienced, battle-tested, full of veterans who know how to win when it matters. On paper, the Fever being competitive in that series was already an achievement. But if you actually watched those games, really watched them, you saw opportunities. You saw moments where better coaching decisions could have swung games. You saw tactical errors a more experienced, more innovative coach wouldn't have made. Game management in crunch time was questionable. Timeout usage was bizarre. Defensive adjustments came too late, or not at all. And the offensive sets in crucial possessions looked panicked, disorganized, like a team that hadn't been properly prepared for the pressure of playoff basketball. Again, some of that is expected with a young team. Growing pains are real. But Caitlin Clark wasn't playing like an overwhelmed rookie in those moments. She was playing like a stone-cold killer who wanted to win at all costs. Her performance level didn't match her experience level. She was playing above it. The coaching, however, was playing exactly at expectation. Competent, adequate, but nowhere near elite. And that's the gap that should terrify Fever fans moving forward. Because here's what's about to happen. The rest of the league is catching up. They've seen the Caitlin Clark show for a full season now. They've studied the film. They've figured out the tendencies. They know what Indiana wants to do. Next season, the element of surprise is gone. The shock and awe of Caitlin's rookie campaign is over. Defenses will be more prepared, more physical, more strategic in how they try to neutralize her. And when that happens, when the degree of difficulty gets cranked up even higher, Indiana is going to need coaching brilliance to counter those adjustments. They're going to need a coach who can innovate, who can scheme, who can outthink the best defensive minds in the league. They're going to need a chess master when the board gets complicated. Is Stephanie White that coach? Can she evolve into that coach? Or is she already operating at her ceiling? Those questions aren't rhetorical. They're urgent. They demand answers before another season gets wasted, before another year of Caitlin's prime gets consumed by mediocrity disguised as building something. And here's the part that should make everyone uncomfortable. There are coaches out there right now who would transform Caitlin Clark into an even more terrifying weapon than she already is. Coaches who would build offensive systems that make her unstoppable. Coaches who would construct defenses that protect her. Coaches who would maximize every single ounce of her potential. But instead, Indiana is committed to Stephanie White. For now, maybe forever. And that decision, that choice to stick with comfort over excellence, nostalgia over innovation, might be the difference between championships and pretty good seasons. The worst part? Caitlin doesn't have time to waste. Her career window isn't infinite. And what I'm about to reveal next shows exactly why every single season matters more than the Fever front office seems to realize. Athletic primes don't last forever. That's not pessimism. That's biology. And when you're dealing with a player like Caitlin Clark, every single season is precious. Every year that gets wasted is a year you never get back. Let me put this in perspective for you. Michael Jordan won his first championship at 28. That seems late, right? But Jordan had Phil Jackson by age 25. He had the right coach, the right system, the right organizational commitment to building around him. Those early years weren't wasted. They were foundation. LeBron James didn't win his first title until he was 27. But by the time he was 24, he'd already been to the finals. He had coaching changes, yes, but he also had organizations that constantly asked themselves, are we doing everything possible to maximize this generational talent? Kobe Bryant won his first championship without Shaq at age 30, but he had Phil Jackson for most of his prime years. He had an organization obsessed with excellence. He had a system built specifically to weaponize his skills. Now let's talk about Caitlin Clark. She's entering just her second year in the WNBA. She's already proven she's transcendent, already proven she can carry a franchise, already proven she's a real deal. But she's also entering year 2 with the exact same coaching situation that showed cracks in year 1. No evolution, no upgrade, no acknowledgement that maybe, just maybe, there's a better option out there. And that should alarm you. Because history is littered with superstars whose careers were compromised by organizations that settle for good enough instead of demanding greatness. Look at what happened to Barry Sanders, one of the most electrifying running backs in NFL history, retired at 30 because the Detroit Lions could never build a competent team around him. Wasted prime, wasted potential, wasted legacy. Look at what almost happened to Kevin Garnett in Minnesota. Years and years of brilliance, surrounded by mediocrity, until he finally got traded to Boston and immediately won a championship at age 31. How many more rings could he have had with better organizational support earlier in his career? Look at what's happening right now with Mike Trout in baseball. Arguably the best player of his generation, potentially wasting his entire Hall of Fame career with the Angels because they can't build a playoff team around him. These aren't just cautionary tales. These are warnings screaming at us from across the sports landscape. When you have greatness, you cannot afford to be comfortable. You cannot afford to be patient with mediocrity. You cannot afford to waste years hoping things will magically improve. And that's exactly what the Fever are risking with the Stephanie White situation. Now, some of you are probably thinking, but they made the playoffs. They were competitive. That's progress. And you're not wrong. Progress happened, but progress isn't the same as maximization. There's a massive difference between a good season and a championship culture. There's a canyon-sized gap between pretty competitive and built to dominate. The question isn't whether Stephanie White can coach a decent team. She clearly can. The question is whether she can coach an elite team, whether she can take Caitlin Clark from all-star to MVP to champion the dynasty. And I'm not seeing evidence of that capability. You want to know who I think could maximize Caitlin Clark? Let's talk about some names that should be in consideration. Coaches who have proven they can adapt, innovate, and build around transcendent talent. Becky Hammon. She just won a championship with the Las Vegas Aces. She's worked under Greg Popovich for years, absorbing one of the greatest basketball minds ever. She understands systems, player development, and how to adjust on the fly. She's proven she can handle superstar personalities and get the most out of elite talent. Could you imagine Caitlin Clark in Becky Hammon's offensive system? The ball movement, the screening actions, the freedom to create within structure? That's a championship formula. Sandy Brondello, championship coach, multiple finals appearances, known for her ability to design elite offensive schemes and develop young talent. She took the Phoenix Mercury to a title and has consistently gotten teams to overperform. Put Caitlin in Brondello's hands, and you've got a player who would be unleashed in ways we haven't even seen yet. Cheryl Reeve, dynasty builder, multiple championships with the Minnesota Lynx, mastered defensive schemes and player development. She understands how to build culture, how to balance star power with team success, how to make critical in-game adjustments. Caitlin Clark playing for Cheryl Reeve? That's the kind of pairing that creates legacies. Now, I'm not saying any of these coaches are available. I'm not saying the Fever should or even could make a change right now. Contracts exist. Timing matters. Organizational stability has value. But what I am saying is this. The Fever should be constantly evaluating whether they have the absolute best coaching situation for their franchise player. They should be asking themselves daily, are we doing everything possible to maximize Caitlin's potential? And if the honest answer is anything other than absolutely yes, then changes need to be considered. Because here's what's coming that makes this even more urgent. The new CBA is going to reshape the entire league. Salary structures will change. Player movement will potentially become easier. The power dynamics between players, coaches, and front offices will shift. And when that happens, when the landscape transforms, you better believe that other teams are going to be circling. Other organizations will be trying to figure out how to pry Caitlin Clark away from Indiana when the opportunity presents itself. If Caitlin gets frustrated with her situation in Indiana, if she feels like she's not being set up for championship success, if she starts to wonder whether she could accomplish more elsewhere, the Fever could lose her. Not this year, probably not next year, but eventually, and that loss would be catastrophic. This is why the Stephanie White situation is so critical. It's not just about wins and losses this season. It's about building trust with your franchise player. It's about proving to Caitlin that Indiana is committed to surrounding her with excellence, not just familiarity. And right now, I'm not sure that message is being sent clearly enough. The clock is ticking. Caitlin's prime years are finite. The WNBA landscape is shifting. And the decisions Indiana makes right now about coaching, about roster construction, about organizational philosophy will determine whether they build dynasty or waste a generational gift. And what I'm about to show you next reveals exactly how high the stakes really are. Let's talk about what happened during that Olympic training period, because this is where things get really interesting and really concerning. Caitlin Clark didn't make the initial Olympic roster. Controversial decision, debated endlessly across sports media. But instead of sulking, instead of taking the summer off, instead of just waiting for the next WNBA season, she went to work. She trained. She improved. She put in the hours to elevate her game even further. This is the kind of mentality that separates good players from all-time greats. This is the obsessive commitment to excellence that you build franchises around. And where does Stephanie White appear? Right there, at the Olympic training facilities. Not as an Olympic coach, not in any official capacity, just there. Now, on the surface, you could argue this shows dedication. You could say White is being a committed coach who wants to support her players' development year-round. But let me offer you a different perspective, one that's going to make some people uncomfortable. When does Caitlin Clark get the opportunity to be coached by someone else? When does she get to absorb different philosophies, different approaches, different tactical minds? In the NBA, superstars regularly work with specialized trainers in the off-season. They attend camps run by legendary coaches. They seek out different voices, different perspectives, different ways of thinking about the game. Kobe Bryant famously trained with Hakeem Olajuwon to improve his post-game. He worked with different skills coaches every summer, constantly adding new dimensions to his arsenal. LeBron James has worked with countless trainers, coaches, and specialists throughout his career, always looking for that extra edge, that new perspective that could unlock another level. But Caitlin can't even go to Olympic training without Stephanie White hovering around. That's not mentorship. That's not support. That's suffocation. And here's why this matters more than you might think. Coaching diversity and development is crucial. Exposure to different systems, different voices, different ways of thinking about basketball. That's what creates well-rounded, adaptable, championship-level players. If Caitlin only ever hears one voice, only ever learns one system, only ever develops within one philosophical framework, her growth gets capped, her ceiling gets lowered, her potential gets constrained. And for a player of her caliber, that's unacceptable. Now let's talk about what's happening with the rest of the league, because this provides critical context for why the Fever's coaching decision matters so much. Other teams are making aggressive moves. They're upgrading. They're innovating. They're not sitting still and hoping last year's formula will work again. Look at what happened with coaching changes across the WNBA this offseason. Teams are bringing in fresh perspectives. Organizations that underperformed are making bold moves to fix their situations. Meanwhile, Indiana is running it back with the exact same coaching staff, apparently content with good enough. But here's the reality. In professional sports, if you're standing still, you're actually moving backward, because everyone else is improving. Everyone else is adapting. Everyone else is getting better. The Aces aren't resting on their championship. They're retooling, finding ways to stay on top. The Liberty are building something special in New York, investing in coaching, infrastructure, player development. Even teams that didn't make the playoffs are making aggressive changes, trying to close the gap. And Indiana? Indiana is betting that year two of the same coaching staff will magically produce different, better results than year one. That's not strategy. That's hope. And hope is not a plan. You know what else is concerning? The way Stephanie White handled media responsibilities throughout the season. There were multiple instances where her post-game press conferences revealed a disconnect between what was happening on the court and what she seemed to understand about her team's performance. She'd talk about playing the right way after games where Caitlin went nuclear and single-handedly dragged the team to victory, despite the offensive scheme breaking down. She'd emphasize team basketball after losses where the most talented player on the floor wasn't getting enough touches in critical moments. She discussed defensive principles while her team was getting torched in transition because the rotations weren't making sense. Now, every coach deals with media differently. Some are more forthcoming than others, but the pattern that emerged was troubling. A coach who seemed more committed to her vision of how basketball should be played than adapting to the reality of the talent she had. That's ego getting in the way of excellence. And when you're coaching a generational talent, your ego cannot be part of the equation. Phil Jackson famously subjugated his ego to maximize Michael Jordan. He created a system that made Jordan better, while also making everyone around him better. That's elite coaching. Steve Kerr completely changed his offensive philosophy when Kevin Durant joined the Warriors, adapting his system to maximize the new talent. That's championship-level flexibility. Eric Spoelstra transformed the Heat's entire approach when LeBron arrived, then transformed it again when he left, then rebuilt it around Jimmy Butler's unique skill set. That's coaching excellence. Has Stephanie White shown that level of adaptability, that willingness to tear up the playbook and rebuild it around Caitlin's transcendent abilities? Or is she still trying to fit a Ferrari into a garage built for a sedan? The film doesn't lie. And if you go back and watch critical possessions from key games last season, you'll see the same concerning patterns over and over. Caitlin in rhythm, and the ball swings away from her for 3 straight possessions. Caitlin heating up from deep, and suddenly the offense shifts to post-ups and mid-range isolations. Caitlin orchestrating beautiful pick-and-roll actions, and then getting yanked for a rest at the worst possible momentum-killing moment. These aren't accidents. These are coaching decisions, and they reveal a philosophy that doesn't match the talent. Here's what should be happening instead. Indiana should be running an offensive system that's completely built around Caitlin's unique abilities. Every screening action, every spacing concept, every set play should be designed to either get her a great look or use her gravity to create advantages for teammates. The way Golden State's entire offense is built around Steph Curry's shooting threat. That's the model. Curry doesn't have to dominate the ball to dominate the game because the entire system is designed around the gravity he creates. That's what Caitlin needs. That's what she deserves. And that's what Stephanie White hasn't delivered. And before you say it's only been one season, let me remind you, in professional sports, you don't get unlimited chances to figure out. Windows close. Opportunities disappear. Competitors get better. The Fever cannot afford to waste year 2 hoping things improve. They need to demand improvement. They need to ensure improvement. And if Stephanie White can't deliver that, if she can't evolve into the elite level coach that Caitlin Clark deserves, then the organization needs to be prepared to make a difficult decision. Because loyalty to coaches is admirable, but loyalty to excellence is what wins championships. And what's about to happen in the CBA negotiation is going to test Indiana's commitment to excellence in ways nobody's prepared for. The CBA situation is about to blow up, and when it does, everything we've been discussing about Stephanie White and Caitlin Clark is going to get magnified by a factor of 10. Let me explain why this moment in WNBA history is so critical and why Indiana's coaching decision is inextricably linked to the league's survival. Right now, the WNBA and the WNBPA are at a standstill. The league has sent 3 comprehensive offers. The players have rejected all of them. And now, radio silence. The WNBA has essentially stopped negotiating. That's not a negotiating tactic. That's a statement. The league is saying, we've given you our best offers. Take it or leave it. We're done playing games. And the WNBPA's response? They put an inflatable rat in front of the NBA offices in New York. They wore "Pay us what you owe us" t-shirts. They've been running a public pressure campaign designed to shame the league into submission. But here's what they're missing. Here's the fundamental miscalculation that's going to backfire spectacularly if they don't wake up soon. You can't demand more money while delivering a product that doesn't justify the investment. The All-Star Game debacle proved this beyond any reasonable doubt. Players showed up wearing their protest t-shirts, making their public demands for higher salaries. Then they went out and played the most unwatchable, embarrassing exhibition game in WNBA history. Fans were leaving at halftime. People who paid real money for tickets walked out because the product was so bad. The effort was non-existent. The entertainment value was zero. And you want to know the worst part? Caitlin Clark didn't even play. The one player that most fans actually showed up to see, the reason that arena was sold out in the first place. She wasn't on the court. So what message does that send? What does it tell the league, the sponsors, the television networks, the casual fans who are still deciding whether women's basketball is worth their attention? It tells them that the players feel entitled to money they haven't earned through performance. It tells them that the star priorities are political statements, not entertaining the audience. It tells them that the WNBA's product, without Caitlin Clark, isn't worth watching. And that's devastating for the players' negotiating position. Now, let's connect this to Stephanie White and the Fever situation. During all of this drama, during all of this chaos, during all of this uncertainty about the league's future, where is Indiana's leadership? What is the Fever organization doing to position itself for success regardless of how the CBA shakes out? They're standing pat. They're keeping the same coaching staff. They're apparently satisfied with their current trajectory. But here's what they should be doing. They should be building a championship infrastructure around Caitlin Clark that's so compelling, so excellent, so clearly superior to any alternative, that Caitlin never even thinks about leaving. Because make no mistake, if the new CBA increases player mobility, it becomes easier for superstars to change teams. If free agency gets expanded, Caitlin Clark is going to have options. And if she's not completely fulfilled in Indiana, if she feels like the organization isn't doing everything possible to help her win championships, if she starts to wonder whether another franchise might be a better fit, she's gone. And when Caitlin leaves, she takes everything with her: the fans, the ratings, the revenue, the relevance. Indiana goes back to being an afterthought. The Fever go back to playing in front of empty seats. The entire franchise collapses back into irrelevance. That's the stakes. That's what the Fever are gambling with by settling for good enough coaching instead of demanding excellence. Now let's talk about Adam Silver's approach to these negotiations, because it reveals something important about how the league views this moment. Silver has been remarkably consistent in his messaging. He said, essentially, we're doing everything we can to raise salaries. We're investing in the WNBA's growth. But the increases have to be sustainable. The demands have to be reasonable. Notice what he's not saying. He's not saying, you're right, players deserve 50% of revenue immediately. He's not capitulating to the pressure campaign. He's not pretending that the WNBA's economics are somehow comparable to the NBA's. He's being honest. Brutally, uncomfortably honest. The WNBA has lost money for most of its existence. The owners have been subsidizing the league for decades. The growth we've seen recently, driven almost entirely by Caitlin Clark, is promising but not guaranteed to continue. And in that environment, demanding massive salary increases based on comparisons to male athletes in more established, more profitable leagues is disconnected from reality. Now, does that mean players don't deserve more? Of course not. They absolutely deserve to benefit from the league's growth. They absolutely deserve fair compensation for their labor. But fair has to be defined by actual economics, not wishful thinking or political narratives. And here's where Caitlin Clark gets caught in the middle of all this dysfunction. She's the reason the league is growing. She's generating the revenue that's funding these negotiations. She's putting butts in seats and eyeballs on screens. But the WNBA isn't building their strategy around protecting and supporting their biggest asset. Instead, they're treating her like an obstacle Someone who needs to get in line with the collective demands rather than being elevated as the engine driving the entire movement. The subtle jabs at Caitlin for not participating in the t-shirt protest. The pressure to conform to the group's messaging. The undercurrent of resentment toward the player who's actually making all this growth possible. It's backwards. It's self-defeating. And it's going to explode eventually. Because Caitlin Clark doesn't need the WNBA. The WNBA needs Caitlin Clark. Without her, the leverage disappears. Without her, the ratings collapse. Without her, the sponsors lose interest. Without her, the entire negotiating position crumbles. And if the WNBA continues to marginalize her, continues to treat her like a problem rather than a solution, continues to prioritize collective politics over individual excellence, they're going to lose her support entirely. And then what? This is why coaching matters so much in this moment. This is why the Stephanie White situation is connected to everything else happening in the league. Caitlin needs an ally. She needs a coach who's fully in her corner. She needs someone who's going to protect her interests, maximize her potential, and shield her from the political nonsense that's consuming the league. Is Stephanie White that person? Based on what we've seen, it's doubtful. White has shown a tendency to prioritize collective harmony over individual excellence. She's emphasized team basketball in situations where Caitlin's individual brilliance was the only thing keeping Indiana competitive. That philosophical approach might be admirable in theory, but in practice, in this moment, with this player, in this league environment, it's exactly wrong. Caitlin needs a coach who's going to be unafraid to say, "This team goes as far as Caitlin takes us. Period. Everything else is secondary." And I haven't seen Stephanie White make that declaration. I haven't seen her unequivocally commit to building around Caitlin's unique genius. Instead, I've seen a coach who seems more comfortable with conventional wisdom than revolutionary thinking. And that's a problem. A big one. Because what's coming next is going to require revolutionary thinking. The league is about to change dramatically. The rules are about to shift. The power dynamics are about to transform. And whoever is coaching Caitlin Clark through that transition is going to determine whether she becomes the greatest player in WNBA history or just another wasted talent in a league that couldn't get out of its own way. The pressure is building. The moment of truth is approaching. And what I'm about to reveal next shows exactly how unprepared Indiana might be for what's coming. Let's talk about what championship organizations actually look like. Because when you compare Indiana's current setup to the gold standard in professional sports, the gaps become painfully obvious. The Las Vegas Aces didn't become back-to-back champions by accident. They didn't stumble into dominance through luck or timing. They engineered it. Start with coaching. Becky Hammon isn't just a good coach. She's an elite coach who spent years learning under Greg Popovich in San Antonio. She absorbed championship DNA. She understands how to manage egos, how to make tactical adjustments on the fly, how to get maximum effort from every player on the roster. When Hammon took over the Aces, she didn't just maintain the status quo. She transformed the culture. She demanded excellence. She implemented systems specifically designed to unleash Io Wilson's dominance while creating space for complementary pieces to thrive. That's intentional design. That's championship architecture. Now compare that to Indiana's approach. Stephanie White was hired after 2 years with Connecticut Sun's solid resume, respectable coaching career, Indiana connections that made it feel like a homecoming story. But where's the championship DNA? Where's the history of maximizing transcendent talent? Where's the evidence that she can take a good team and transform it into an elite one? It doesn't exist, because it hasn't happened yet. And hoping it will happen, hoping that White will suddenly evolve into an elite-level coach without any track record suggesting she's capable of that leap, is gambling with Caitlin Clark's prime years. Championship organizations don't hope. They demand. They engineer. They refuse to settle. Let's look at roster construction next, because this is where coaching philosophy directly impacts everything else. The Aces didn't just happen to have Io Wilson, Kelsey Plum, Jackie Young, and Chelsea Gray on the same team. They deliberately assembled a roster where every piece fits together, where every player's strengths complement the others, where the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. That's front office brilliance working in perfect harmony with coaching vision. What's Indiana doing to surround Caitlin with the right complementary pieces? Last season, the Fever had talent. Kelsey Mitchell is a legitimate scorer. Aaliyah Boston is a rising star. Nalissa Smith has potential. But did those pieces fit together optimally? Did the coaching staff deploy them in ways that maximize Caitlin's unique abilities? Too often, the answer was no. There were games where Mitchell and Clark seemed to be competing for shots rather than complementing each other's scoring. There were possessions where Boston was posted up on the block, while Caitlin stood in the corner, negating both players' strengths simultaneously. That's coaching failure. That's schematic dysfunction. That's what happens when you don't have a clear, coherent vision for how your roster should function together. And here's what makes this even more concerning. The injuries that derailed Indiana's season weren't just bad luck. They were, at least partially, predictable outcomes of how the team was being managed. When you're running your franchise player into the ground, when you're not managing minutes intelligently, when you're not protecting your most valuable assets from unnecessary wear and tear, injuries happen. Caitlin Clark played through exhaustion multiple times. She was asked to carry impossible loads because the coaching staff had no backup plan, no secondary system that could function without her on the floor. That's not unlucky. That's organizational negligence. Championship organizations protect their stars. They manage workloads carefully. They build depth so that superstars can get rest without the team collapsing. The Spurs famously rested Tim Duncan, Tony Parker, and Manu Ginobili throughout the regular season to keep them fresh for playoffs. They prioritize long-term success over short-term regular season wins. The Warriors have been meticulous about Steph Curry's minutes throughout his career, understanding that preserving his body for the postseason is more important than any individual regular season game. Did Stephanie White show that kind of strategic foresight with Caitlin? Or was she too focused on winning the game in front of her to think about the bigger picture? The evidence suggests the latter. And that's a red flag that should concern everyone invested in Caitlin's long-term success. Now let's talk about player development, because this is where coaching impact really shows over time. Great coaches don't just manage games. They develop players. They take talented athletes and turn them into better, more complete versions of themselves. Phil Jackson developed Michael Jordan's leadership abilities. He helped Jordan evolve from a brilliant individual scorer into a player who could elevate everyone around him. Steve Kerr developed Steph Curry's off-ball movement into an art form. He created systems that made Curry's gravity even more devastating than his shooting alone. Becky Hammon has developed Aya Wilson into the most complete player in the WNBA. Wilson's evolution under Hammon's coaching has been remarkable. She's become a better passer, a better defender, a smarter player in every facet of the game, whereas Stephanie White developed in Caitlin Clark. Now, to be fair, Caitlin arrived in the WNBA as an incredibly polished player. She didn't have the same development needs as a raw, athletic prospect. Her skills were already elite, but even elite players can improve. Even transcendent talents have areas where they can grow. Caitlin's defense was a question mark coming into the league. Has she improved dramatically in that area under White's coaching? The evidence is mixed at best. Caitlin's ability to play without the ball, to be effective even when she's not initiating offense, was an area for potential growth. Has White designed systems that develop that aspect of her game? Not obviously. Caitlin's leadership, her ability to make teammates better, her evolution from individual star to orchestrator of team success. Has White accelerated that development? It's unclear. What we've seen mostly is Caitlin being Caitlin. She's carried the team with her individual brilliance, her supernatural passing vision, her unconscious shooting range. But has she grown? Has she developed new dimensions? Has coaching made her better than she was when she arrived? That's the question that should haunt Indiana's front office. Because player development is the ultimate measure of coaching effectiveness. And if Caitlin isn't getting better, if she's just maintaining her already elite level while the rest of the league catches up, then Indiana has fallen behind without even realizing it. Here's what elite player development looks like in practice. A great coach identifies a player's weaknesses and creates structured opportunities to improve them. They design drills, film sessions, and game situations that specifically target areas for growth. A great coach challenges their star players mentally, pushing them to see the game differently, to think more strategically, to lead more effectively. A great coach creates an environment where failure is acceptable as part of the learning process, where experimentation is encouraged, where growth is prioritized over comfort. Has Stephanie White created that environment for Caitlin? Based on what we've seen publicly, it doesn't appear so. Instead, we've seen a coach who seemed content to let Caitlin do what Caitlin does, without pushing her to expand her already extraordinary abilities. That might work for a season or two, but eventually the league adjusts. Eventually, defenses figure out how to neutralize even transcendent talents. Eventually, individual brilliance isn't enough anymore. When that moment comes, and it will come, Caitlin is going to need new tools, new dimensions, new ways to attack defenses that have studied her extensively. And if White hasn't developed those tools during these critical early years of Caitlin's career, Indiana is going to be in serious trouble. The clock is ticking. The window is finite. And what I'm about to reveal next shows exactly how quickly things can go wrong when coaching doesn't match talent. History is full of cautionary tales. Generational talents whose careers were compromised by organizational dysfunction. Superstars who never reached their full potential because the pieces around them, especially the coaching, weren't good enough. Let me tell you about some of them. Because if you understand what went wrong in these situations, you'll understand exactly why the Stephanie White situation is so dangerous. Tracy McGrady, one of the most gifted scorers in NBA history, unguardable at his peak, could get a bucket from anywhere on the floor against anyone. And what does he have to show for it? 0 championships, 0 finals appearances, a career defined by unfulfilled potential. Why? Because Orlando never built the right team around him, never gave him the right coach, never created the infrastructure necessary to translate individual brilliance into team success. By the time McGrady finally landed in a better situation with Houston, his body was breaking down. The years of carrying mediocre teams had taken their toll. The window had closed. That's what wasted prime years look like. That's what happens when organizations settle for good enough instead of demanding excellence. Vince Carter, another transcendent talent, another career that fell short of its potential. Carter had every physical gift imaginable. The athleticism, the scoring ability, the charisma to be the face of a franchise. He should have multiple championships. He should be mentioned in the same breath as Kobe and LeBron. Instead, he bounced from team to team, never quite finding the right situation, never getting the coaching and roster support necessary to win at the highest level. By the time Carter was finally on a contender, late in his career with the Mavericks, he was a role player, not a star. The prime years were gone. The opportunity was wasted. Carmelo Anthony. This one might be the most relevant to Caitlin's situation. Melo was a generational scorer, a bucket in the half-court whenever you needed one of the purest offensive talents in NBA history. But he spent his prime years in Denver and New York with coaching staffs that couldn't or wouldn't build winning systems around him. He was asked to carry impossible loads. He was blamed when the teams failed. He watched contemporaries like LeBron, Wade, and Bosh win championships while he struggled to get out of the first round. Was it all coaching's fault? No. Carmelo made choices too. But the organizational dysfunction, the revolving door of coaches, the failure to build complementary rosters, that environment made success almost impossible. Now Carmelo is remembered as a great scorer who never won anything, a talent that never translated to championships, an unfulfilled legacy. Is that what we want for Caitlin Clark? Is that the trajectory we're comfortable watching unfold? Because right now, the parallels are uncomfortable. A transcendent talent carrying a team on her back. A coaching staff that seems overwhelmed by the moment. An organization that's settling for progress instead of demanding excellence. A league environment full of politics and dysfunction. All the ingredients for another wasted career are present. All the warning signs are flashing. And if Indiana doesn't wake up, if they don't recognize that the Stephanie White situation needs to be addressed, they're going to look back in 10 years and wonder how they let a generational opportunity slip through their fingers. Now let's flip the script. Let's talk about what happens when organizations get it right. Tim Duncan landed in San Antonio with Greg Popovich. From day one, the entire franchise was built around maximizing Duncan's unique abilities. The coaching, the roster construction, the culture, everything was designed to translate Duncan's greatness into championships. Result? 5 titles. One of the greatest careers in NBA history. A legacy that will never be questioned. Stephen Curry landed in Golden State with an organization committed to innovation. When Steve Kerr arrived, he created an offensive system specifically designed to weaponize Curry's supernatural shooting ability. Result? For championships so far. The transformation of how basketball is played at every level. A legacy as one of the most influential players ever. Giannis Antetokounmpo stayed in Milwaukee even when bigger markets came calling. Why? Because the Bucks demonstrated, through coaching, roster moves, and organizational commitment, that they were dedicated to building a championship team around him. Result? A title in 2021. Validation that small market loyalty can be rewarded when organizations do things the right way. These aren't accidents. These are blueprints. The common thread? Organizations that refuse to settle. Coaching staffs that were built specifically to maximize transcendent talent. A relentless commitment to excellence at every level of the franchise. That's what Indiana should be modeling. That's the standard they should be holding themselves to. And right now, they're falling short. Stephanie White might be a good coach. She might even become a better coach over time. But might isn't good enough when you're dealing with a player like Caitlin Clark. You don't hope your generational talent will be developed properly. You ensure it. You don't gamble with prime years. You protect them. You don't settle for comfortable. You demand extraordinary. And if that means making difficult coaching changes, so be it. If that means prioritizing excellence over loyalty, so be it. If that means doing whatever it takes to maximize Caitlin's potential, whatever it takes, then that's what championship organizations do. Let me be very clear about something. I'm not saying Stephanie White is a bad person. I'm not saying she doesn't work hard. I'm not saying she doesn't care about Caitlin's success. What I am saying is that caring isn't enough. Hard work isn't enough. Good intentions aren't enough. Elite coaching is a specific skill set. The ability to maximize transcendent talent is rare. The capacity to build championship systems around unique players is something that very few coaches in the world actually possess. And the evidence from year one, from the Olympic situation, from the patterns we've observed, suggests that Stephanie White might not be one of those rare coaches. That's not an insult. Most coaches aren't at that level. Most coaches are solid, competent professionals who can lead decent teams to respectable results. But Caitlin Clark doesn't need a decent team with respectable results. She needs a dynasty. She needs championships. She needs a coach who can unlock dimensions of her game that we haven't even imagined yet. And if Stephanie White can't be that coach, if she can't evolve into that level of elite leadership, then Indiana needs to find someone who can. Because the alternative is watching history repeat itself. Another wasted talent, another unfulfilled legacy, another cautionary tale that we'll discuss decades from now while shaking our heads and wondering what might have been. The choice is clear. The stakes couldn't be higher. And what's about to happen next is going to force Indiana to make that choice whether they're ready or not. The next 12 months are going to find the Indiana fever for the next decade. Every decision they make or don't make is going to echo through Caitlin Clark's entire career. And I don't think they understand the magnitude of this moment. Let me paint a picture of what's coming. Because when you see all the pieces on the board, when you understand all the forces converging simultaneously, you'll realize why the Stephanie White situation can't wait any longer. First, the CBA is going to get resolved one way or another. The standoff between the WNBA and the WNBPA can't last forever. Eventually, a deal will get done. Money will be distributed. New rules will be implemented. And when that happens, the entire landscape of the league is going to shift. Player movement could become easier. Salary structures could change dramatically. The power dynamics between stars and franchises could tilt in directions we haven't seen before. If Indiana hasn't already locked in Caitlyn's loyalty, emotionally, not just contractually, they're going to be vulnerable. Other organizations with better infrastructure, better coaching, better championship cultures are going to come calling. And Caitlyn will have to ask herself a difficult question. Is Indiana really the best place for me to win? Right now, the honest answer might be no. And that should terrify everyone in the Fever front office. Second, the competition is getting better. Fast. The aces aren't going anywhere. Becky Hammon is one of the best coaches in the sport. Aya Wilson is in her prime and showing no signs of slowing down. Their championship infrastructure is battle-tested and proven. The Liberty are building something dangerous in New York. Big market, big resources, aggressive front office willing to make moves to compete immediately. The Storm, the Sun, the Mercury, all of them are retooling, reloading, preparing to make runs at championships. Meanwhile, what is Indiana doing? Running it back with the same coaching staff that couldn't get past the semifinals despite having the most talked about player in the league. That's not a winning formula. That's hoping the competition doesn't get better while you stay the same. But the competition always gets better. That's how sports work. Standing still is the same as moving backward. Third, and this is the part nobody's talking about, Caitlyn's body isn't invincible. She played an enormous amount of minutes last season. She carried physical and mental loads that would break most players. She dealt with targeting, with excessive physicality, with the toll of being the most scrutinized player in the league. That wears on you. It accumulates. And eventually it catches up. The injuries that hit the Fever last season, the ones that derailed their championship hopes, aren't random bad luck. They're predictable consequences of poor roster management, inadequate load monitoring, and coaching decisions that prioritize short-term wins over long-term health. If Indiana doesn't fix those systemic issues, if they don't build better depth and manage Caitlyn's workload more intelligently, the injuries will keep coming. And eventually, one of those injuries will hit Caitlyn herself. That's not fear-mongering. That's reality. And pretending it won't happen doesn't prevent it from happening. Fourth, the media environment is becoming more toxic by the day. Caitlyn is operating in a fishbowl. Every game, every performance, every interaction is dissected and debated by millions of people. Some of that attention is positive. A lot of it is negative. The jealousy from other players, the political narratives, the constant attempts to diminish her accomplishments or frame her success as somehow problematic. That's exhausting. That's mentally draining. And it requires a support system, especially a coaching staff, that's equipped to protect her from the noise while keeping her focused on basketball. Does Stephanie White provide that protection? Does she create an environment where Caitlyn can block out the external chaos and just play? Based on what we've seen, it's unclear. And unclear isn't good enough when the stakes are this high. Fifth, the expectations are about to explode. Year one, Caitlyn could exceed expectations by simply being competitive. Making the playoffs as a rookie-led team was an achievement. Pushing the defending champions to 5 games was validation. Year two, those standards don't apply anymore. Now the expectations are championships. Now anything less than a finals appearance will be viewed as regression. Now the scrutiny will be even more intense. The criticism even more relentless. Is Stephanie White equipped to coach in that pressure cooker? Has she ever operated at that level of expectation? The answer is no. Her previous stops, Connecticut, her earlier coaching positions, didn't carry anything close to this level of scrutiny. She's never been the coach of the most watched, most discussed, most analyzed team in women's basketball history. And learning on the job at this stage, with this much at stake, is incredibly risky. Now let's talk about what Indiana should be doing right now, because it's not too late to get this right. The window hasn't closed yet, but it's closing fast. Step 1. Conduct a brutally honest evaluation of Stephanie White's coaching. Not a friendly evaluation. Not a we're all on the same team evaluation. A cold, objective, evidence-based analysis of whether she has the capacity to coach a championship team. Bring in outside consultants. Study the film from critical games. Interview players confidentially about how they experience the coaching environment. Leave no stone unturned. And if the conclusion is that White isn't the right coach for this moment, be prepared to make a change. Step 2. Identify potential coaching upgrades immediately. Even if they ultimately decide to keep White, Indiana should know exactly who they would pursue if a change became necessary. They should have relationships with elite coaching candidates. They should understand what it would take to attract top-tier talent to the franchise. Hope is not a strategy. Preparation is. Step 3. Build roster depth that protects Caitlin. The Fever cannot go into next season with a roster that collapses without Caitlin on the floor. They need legitimate secondary scoring. They need defensive stoppers. They need veterans who can carry the load during strategic rest periods. This is roster construction 101. Championship teams don't rely on one player for everything. They build infrastructure that allows superstars to thrive without destroying their bodies. Step 4. Create a development plan specifically for Caitlin. What are the areas of her game that need improvement? What new skills could unlock even higher levels of performance? What does her evolution from all-star to MVP to champion actually look like? That plan should exist in detailed, documented form. It should guide every practice, every film session, every coaching interaction. It should be the North Star that orients everything the franchise does. Step 5. Insulate Caitlin from the political nonsense, the CBA drama, the WNBA politics, the media narratives. None of that should touch Caitlin directly. The organization should create a protective bubble that allows her to focus entirely on basketball. That's what championship organizations do. They handle the distractions so their stars can perform. Is Indiana doing any of this? Based on what we're seeing publicly, it's doubtful. Instead, we got Stephanie White attending Pacers games while the league burns around her. We've got an organization that seems content with last year's progress rather than hungry for next year's championships. We got a franchise that doesn't seem to grasp the urgency of the moment. And that's why I'm sounding the alarm. That's why this conversation matters. That's why every Fever fan should be demanding more from their organization. Because the window is open right now. The opportunity is here right now. The chance to build something legendary is available right now. But windows close. Opportunities disappear. Chances slip away. And what happens next is going to determine whether Indiana seizes this moment or watches it evaporate forever. So where does this leave us? After everything we've discussed, the coaching concerns, the CBA chaos, the wasted opportunities, the cautionary tales from sports history, what's the path forward? Let me be direct with you, because this moment demands clarity, not hedging. The Indiana Fever have approximately 6 months to figure this out. 6 months before the next season begins. 6 months before Caitlin Clark's second year determines the trajectory of her entire career. That's not a lot of time. And every day they waste is a day they'll never get back. Here's what needs to happen, and I mean needs to happen, not would be nice if it happened. Stephanie White has to prove she can evolve. And I mean prove it, not promise it, not suggest it, not hint at it. She needs to demonstrate, through concrete actions and measurable changes, that she's capable of becoming the elite-level coach Caitlin Clark deserves. That means fundamentally rethinking the offensive system, building everything, and I mean everything, around Caitlyn's unique abilities, creating schemes that weaponize her range, her vision, her gravity in ways we didn't see last season. That means revolutionizing minute management, protecting Caitlyn's body, building depth so she's not carrying unsustainable loads every single night. That means developing a championship mentality, demanding excellence from every player, creating accountability structures that don't accept mediocrity, refusing to settle for competitive. Can Stephanie White do all that? Maybe. But maybe is a terrifying word when you're dealing with a generational talent. If she can't evolve, if she can't demonstrate genuine transformation during this offseason, then Indiana has to be prepared to make the difficult decision. They have to be willing to move on, even if it's uncomfortable, even if it creates short-term chaos. Because long-term championships are more important than short-term stability. Now, let's talk about Caitlyn's role in all of this, because she's not a passive participant in her own career. At some point, maybe this offseason, maybe after next season, Caitlyn is going to have to advocate for herself. She's going to have to demand the coaching and infrastructure she deserves. That's not selfish. That's not being a diva. That's what all-time greats do. Michael Jordan demanded excellence from the Bulls organization. When coaches and players weren't meeting his standards, he made it known. He pushed for changes. He refused to accept mediocrity. LeBron James has been actively involved in coaching and roster decisions throughout his career. He's advocated for specific coaches. He's pushed for specific roster moves. He's taken ownership of his basketball environment. Tom Brady changed teams at age 43 because he recognized that New England's infrastructure wasn't good enough anymore. He demanded better and won a Super Bowl his first year with Tampa Bay. These aren't examples of players being difficult. These are examples of all-time greats taking control of their destinies. Caitlyn needs to do the same thing. And if Stephanie White isn't the right coach, Caitlyn needs to make that clear, respectfully but unambiguously, because nobody else is going to protect Caitlyn's career for her. The league won't do it. They've shown they're willing to let political narratives undermine her at every turn. The WNBA won't do it. They've demonstrated they view her as an obstacle rather than an ally. Even the Fever organization might not do it. They've shown a tendency toward comfort over excellence. Caitlyn has to be her own advocate, and that starts with demanding the coaching she deserves. Now, let me address the Fever fans directly, because you have a role to play in this too. Stop accepting mediocrity. Stop celebrating progress when championships should be the standard. Stop making excuses for an organization that's settling for good enough. Your voices matter. Your ticket purchases matter. Your social media engagement matters. When you demand excellence, loudly, consistently, relentlessly, organizations respond. When you accept mediocrity, when you celebrate modest improvements like their championships, organizations get comfortable. The Fever need to feel pressure from their fan base. They need to understand that pretty good isn't acceptable when you have a generational talent on your roster. So speak up, make noise, demand that Indiana does everything possible to maximize Caitlin Clark's potential. Because if you don't, who will? Let me paint two pictures of the future. Because the fork in the road is right here, right now, and the path Indiana chooses will determine everything. Path 1, Indiana gets it right. They either upgrade coaching or White transforms into an elite-level coach. They build roster depth that protects Caitlyn. They create a championship infrastructure that rivals the Aces dynasty. In this scenario, Caitlyn spends her entire career in Indiana. She wins multiple championships. She becomes the greatest player in WNBA history. She transforms the franchise, the city, and the entire league. The Fever become a destination. Free agents want to play in Indiana. The organization prints money. The arena is sold out for decades. That's the upside. That's what's possible if Indiana seizes this moment. Path 2, Indiana blows it. They stick with Stephanie White despite evidence she's not the right coach. They fail to build adequate depth. They keep doing what they've always done and hoping for different results. In this scenario, Caitlin gets frustrated. She starts to wonder if she can win in Indiana. She sees other organizations, the Aces, the Liberty, whoever emerges next, building championship cultures while Indiana stagnates. When her contract allows, she leaves. The fans are devastated. The franchise collapses back into irrelevance. The entire WNBA loses its biggest draw, and we spend the next 20 years talking about what could have been. Another Tracy McGrady, another Carmelo Anthony, another generational talent wasted by organizational dysfunction. That's the downside. That's what happens if Indiana doesn't wake up. The choice is theirs, but the clock is ticking. Let me leave you with this thought. Generational talents don't come around often. Maybe once every 20 years, maybe once in a generation, hence the name. When they arrive, you don't play it safe. You don't settle for comfortable. You don't hope things work out. You do whatever it takes. You make difficult decisions. You prioritize excellence over everything else. Caitlin Clark is that generational talent. She's here. She's in Indiana. She's ready to build something legendary. The only question is whether the Indiana Fever are ready to meet her at that level. Whether Stephanie White can become the coach Caitlin deserves, or whether she needs to step aside for someone who can. Whether the organization understands the urgency of this moment, or whether they're going to let it slip away through complacency and comfort. The answer to those questions will determine everything. And right now, based on everything we've seen, I'm not confident Indiana understands what's at stake. That needs a change. It needs a change now. And if it doesn't change, if Stephanie White refuses to get out of Caitlin Clark's way, if she refuses to evolve into the coach this situation demands, then everything we discuss becomes inevitable. Wasted potential, unfulfilled legacy, another cautionary tale. But it doesn't have to be that way. The future isn't written yet. Indiana still has time to get this right. The question is, will they? Make sure you drop your thoughts in the comments. Do you think Stephanie White can become the coach Caitlin deserves? Should the Fever make a change now before it's too late? What would you do if you were running the organization? Like this video if you want to see more real talk about the WNBA. Subscribe if you haven't already. And hit that notification bell so you never miss a video. Because the story isn't over. The next chapter is about to be written. And I promise you, whatever happens next, we're going to be here to break it all down. Stay tuned, stay locked in, and never forget, when you're watching history unfold, every moment matters. Peace.